It was 7:03 a.m. on Christmas morning when the call came. For most of the city, it was a time of laughter, of family and warmth. For Detective Laura Hastings, it would become the moment everything changed. She wasn't a rookie, not exactly, but she was the department's quiet underdog. The one officers joked about, the one who always had the files ready, the notes typed, but whose theories were too often dismissed, especially by Captain Richard Mallory, a man whose authority was absolute and whose ego was larger than the city itself. To him, Laura was a shadow, a clerk in a badge's clothing. Until that call. The voice on the line was frantic, barely coherent. A woman sobbing, speaking through gasps. It's my children, they're gone. Laura's instincts ignited. She scribbled the address, her hands shaking. It was a quiet suburban street, decorated with Christmas lights, carols faint in the winter air. She grabbed her coat, keys, and notebook. The adrenaline, so familiar, coursed through her veins. Captain Mallory intercepted her at the elevator. "You're not needed on this one, Hastings. Traffic accident, false alarm probably. Let the uniformed officers handle it," he said, voice smooth but firm, his eyes dismissive. Laura didn't argue. She smiled, a small, almost invisible smile. She didn't need permission to act. She was faster, sharper, and she had something no one else did. Intuition. The house was dark. Too dark. Windows blackened with smoke stains. The faint smell of burnt sugar and pine clung to the air. Laura's heart pounded. Something wasn't right. The front door hung ajar. Inside, the living room was a scene from a nightmare. Torn wrapping paper, shattered ornaments, and a single overturned chair in the middle of the room. And then she saw them. 2 small footprints in ash. The children were gone. Captain Mallory arrived 20 minutes later. His expression carefully neutral. "We've secured the perimeter," he said, taking control of the scene. He didn't ask her to step back. He simply assumed the authority. Laura, however, already noticed details he overlooked. Burn marks on the carpet, smudged fingerprints on the mantel, and a small, blackened envelope tucked behind the Christmas tree skirt. Ignoring his presence, Laura opened it. Inside, a photo of the children tied to a chair in a dimly lit basement, their eyes wide with fear. A note in elegant, cruel handwriting. "They will learn who is really in charge." Mallory glanced over her shoulder, frowning. "Where did you get that?" he asked. He sounded more curious than alarmed. Laura didn't answer. She already knew. The person responsible wasn't a stranger. It was someone who wanted her to fail. Someone who thrived on her underestimation. For hours, Laura traced clues that others dismissed. The note led her to a storage facility, the smoldering remains of an abandoned warehouse, and finally, to a small townhouse near the river. Every step was a game of chess, with Mallory attempting to assert control at every turn. "Step back," he said repeatedly. "We have it under control." But Laura had already pieced together the pattern. Every previous case of abduction, every subtle clue ignored by the department, pointed to one man. Nathaniel Pierce, a local businessman with influence and wealth beyond comprehension, untouchable because Mallory had long protected him. Pierce wasn't just powerful. He was untouchable, insulated by law, money, and fear. And Mallory was his gatekeeper. Laura's pulse quickened. The very system she trusted had betrayed her, and yet she couldn't wait. She had to save the children by nightfall. Laura cornered Pierce's townhouse. The lights were off. A single wreath hung on the door, mocking the horror inside. She called Mallory, keeping her voice calm. "Sir, I found the location. The children are still alive. We need to move." There was a pause. Then, almost a whisper, Mallory replied, "Hastings, think carefully. Don't get yourself killed. Let me handle it." She hung up. For the first time, she realized the man who should have been her protector might have been the greatest threat of all. She slipped inside the townhouse, silent as a shadow. Every creak of the floor, every gust of winter wind, set her nerves on fire. Then she heard it, a muffled cry from below. The children, alive. She raced down the basement stairs. There, tied and frightened, were two small faces staring at her like lifelines. The ropes cut just enough to scare, not to kill. And standing in the corner, smirking, was Pierce himself, unarmed but cocky, confident that no one could touch him. "You're late," he said calmly. "I wondered if you'd even notice." Laura didn't respond. She pulled out a small pair of bolt cutters, freeing the children. But Pierce stepped forward, blocking the exit. "I warned you," he said, voice low. "You don't have the power. You'll never stop me. You're just a clerk with a badge." And then something happened. Something Mallory didn't anticipate. Laura reached into her coat pocket and pressed a small button. Outside, the sound of sirens swelled. Federal agents, tipped anonymously, were converging. Mallory's face appeared at the doorframe. Shock and fury etched into every line. He had been played, unknowingly betrayed by the very underdog he had underestimated for years. Pierce lunged, but Laura grabbed the children, dragging them behind the basement support beam. Within moments, the agents stormed in. Pierce and Mallory were separated. Handcuffs, confrontation. The children were safe. The powerful man who thought he controlled everything was exposed, humiliated, and powerless. Laura stood in the cold basement, the children clinging to her, trembling but alive. She finally understood what it meant to fight when everyone told you to stay invisible. The underdog had turned the tables. She had outsmarted the man who underestimated her. Justice had been served. But as she held the children, warm tears running down their faces, a new message appeared on her phone. No number, no name, just text. "You've won this battle. The war isn't over. See you next year." Laura's heart stopped. She looked out the frost-covered window at the Christmas lights shimmering in the quiet city streets. Someone else had been watching. Someone else was planning. And deep down, she knew the next call might come even sooner than she expected. Snow blanketed the city in silence. But inside Detective Laura Hastings' apartment, every nerve was on edge. The children were safe, yet her phone buzzed relentlessly. Unknown numbers, blocked lines, cryptic messages. The lesson continues. You were lucky this time. Laura knew she hadn't seen the last of this. Someone was still out there, orchestrating chaos, learning from every move she made. Mallory had been taken into custody, Pierce in handcuffs, yet the shadow of influence stretched further than she could see. She couldn't trust anyone, not her colleagues, not the system. She knew that a single misstep could cost more lives. And so, she prepared, reviewing every piece of evidence, mapping connections she hadn't had time to explore before. Every abandoned warehouse, every private residence linked to Pierce, every subtle hint Mallory had tried to bury. It was all there, waiting for her to expose. She worked through the night, her determination sharper than exhaustion, driven by the voices of those she couldn't save before. The next morning, she received a call from a federal investigator she had never met. "Detective Hastings, we need your full report," the voice said. "Your observations saved lives, but we've identified another series of patterns. Someone has been emulating Pierce. It's unprecedented." Laura's pulse quickened. Another copycat. Another risk. She listened as he spoke, recording every detail. By noon, she knew it was true. A new figure was already active, learning from the original killer, using Mallory's brief exposure as a blueprint. Laura's attention returned to her apartment when she noticed something odd. A single gold ornament, identical to Pierce's trophies, sitting on her windowsill. No wrapping, no note. Just the ornament. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just a threat. It was a challenge. A message that someone else was ready to continue the ritual she had barely survived. She glanced at the children, playing quietly under her supervision. Protecting them wasn't enough anymore. She had to act before another family suffered the same fate. By evening, Laura traced a potential location based on new surveillance footage and inconsistencies in shipping logs. An old church on the outskirts of the city, long abandoned, lights flickering weakly through broken windows. Laura moved cautiously, baton in hand, flashlight sweeping across debris. Every step echoed through the cavernous space, every shadow threatening. She could feel the weight of the city's failure pressing down on her, the ghosts of the children she couldn't save in past cases whispering warnings. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Not Pierce, not Mallory. Someone younger, more agile, with the same cold detachment in their eyes. "Detective Hastings," the figure said, voice eerily calm, almost mocking. "You stopped him, but you didn't understand him. Now you'll understand me." Laura steadied herself, adrenaline flooding every vein. She realized this wasn't just another criminal. This was an apprentice, a student of terror, trained to mimic Pierce's meticulous cruelty. She reached for her radio, but the signal had been jammed. She was on her own. What followed was a tense confrontation, a deadly game of cat and mouse across the church's ruins. Laura relied on her wits, not brute force, ducking behind pillars, creating distractions, exploiting weaknesses in the environment. The figure lunged, knife glinting, and she barely avoided a strike, rolling across broken tile. Laura's heart hammered. Every instinct screamed. Protect the children, survive, expose the system, and never trust the powerful again. Finally, she managed to immobilize the attacker temporarily, tying them with discarded wires while calling the federal team for backup. Minutes later, law enforcement flooded the area. Guns drawn, commands shouted. The apprentice was apprehended, but not before leaving a cryptic final message. "The lessons are only beginning. Watch your back next Christmas." Laura watched, exhausted but alive, realizing the pattern had evolved. The story was far from over. Justice had been served, temporarily, but the underdog understood a harsh truth. The system could fail, the powerful could manipulate, and evil could adapt faster than anyone anticipated. She returned home, hands trembling, children asleep in their beds. She locked the doors, checked the windows, and looked at the Christmas tree, ornaments shimmering innocently in the dim light. One gold ornament was missing, the one she had found earlier. She froze. Someone had been inside. Someone had been watching. Laura knew with absolute certainty that next Christmas would bring another call, another test, and the shadow of Pierce's legacy would continue to haunt the city. And as snow fell silently outside, drifting against the glow of streetlights, Laura made a promise. She would be ready. She would protect the innocent. She would fight. And she would finally expose the full network that had allowed Pierce, and now his apprentice, to strike.